Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Krishnan guru-murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to extraordinary people about the big ideas in their lives and the events that have helped shape them. Now, my guest this week has written a book all about changing the world. It's called Go Big, How to Fix Our World, and it's by Ed Miliband. Now, Ed, of course, has been leader of the Labour Party, but he's back in frontline politics, having left it for a little while as the shadow business secretary. And before he was a frontline, front of house politician, he was Gordon Brown's right-hand man. He's also been an academic, so he's eminently qualified to write something like this. And I suppose the starting point, Ed, for this was, well, really when you were out of frontline politics and doing the podcast Reasons to be Cheerful and taking in a lot of exciting ideas.
Definitely, Krishnan. And, you, I think, have the experience of doing a successful podcast. I have the experience of doing a podcast. And it was a chance, really. I lost the election in 2015, and losing an election is quite a thing, and maybe we'll get into that. But I wanted to carry on talking about ideas because, it was ideas that motivated me, that got me into politics, ideas to make the world a better place. And then we did the podcast, Jeff Lloyd and I, and he said to me in 2017, look, there are great ideas out there. Let's give people a sense of hope that there are big ideas to change the world. And that was what led to the podcast, and then that's led to the book. And really what I want to sort of persuade people of is, at least maybe, that however big the problems there are solutions out there. Some of them are already being practiced. I think the world does need big change. And I suppose I want to give people a bit like the podcast did, a sense of optimism and hope that things can be different, that we made our institutions and that we can remake them. And whether it's climate change or inequality or the housing crisis, there are solutions out there.
But I suppose you started this before you were back in the shadow cabinet. So was there a sense of despair as well with politics and what politics is delivering? And I suppose despair at your own ability to change it.
Well, maybe. I mean, I'd lost the election in 2015. That's a pretty despairing event, losing a general election. You put your heart and soul, I put my heart and soul into trying to win it. The country decided it didn't want me. It wanted David Cameron. But maybe it's part of the progressive condition. And I suppose I feel this more convincingly having written the book, that you don't succeed at the first attempt. The first idea for the NHS, or one of the first times it was thought about, was the 1909 Minority Report on the Poor Laws. It didn't happen until 1948. Think of the struggles for LGBT rights or trade union rights. So yes, I felt incredibly low after I lost the election. I wanted to carry on in politics in some form. I didn't want to stop being a member of parliament. I wanted to carry on pushing ideas. I felt I'd tried to do that unsuccessfully in electoral terms as leader of the Labour Party. And I was looking for an outlet. And I suppose Jeff, who came along, he'd interviewed me in the 2015 general election. I didn't know him well, and came along and said, maybe people, there's a thirst for ideas. And as I say, the podcast led to the book.
But why do you think the answer is to go big rather than go small? There's sort of a refrain in your sort of post-leadership interviews and writing, which is that you weren't radical enough, which in a way is an odd conclusion given people voted Conservative and keep voting Conservative. What makes you think people want radical?
Well, people voted different ways. I mean, so the starting point is what the country demands. I think you've got to start in politics from what do the circumstances require. I felt this as leader, that the only thing that can drive you forward is a sense of your own belief about the state of things and how they need to change. And when you look at the climate crisis, when you look at the inequality crisis we face, I think the argument of the book is we can't shrink from the solutions that are necessary. We're in the decisive decade when it comes to the climate crisis. Going small is going to be a betrayal of future generations. We've had a sort of 30-year problem of inequality. Going small is not going to solve it, right? So that's the sort of, if you like, the starting point. Right? Then the electoral question. I think this is what's changed about the Conservative offer in some ways. You mentioned sort of the Conservatives. Johnson, Trump, Brexit, in different ways, they aren't, at least on the face of it, offering the status quo. They're offering change. My constituency voted for Brexit by a large majority, in Labour constituency, Doncaster North. Now, what did people in my constituency say to me about that? They said, we voted for a new beginning. We voted for something different. So I don't think either in terms of what's right or in terms of necessarily what's popular, that going small is the answer. Now, people might say, well, we don't want to take advice on electoral strategy from him. He lost the election. Okay, fair enough. So this isn't a book of electoral strategy, and it doesn't pretend to be. But I do think that people in politics have a sort of obligation, or whether you're in politics or not, to say, okay, what does the world demand? Working out how you make it electorally popular, maybe that wasn't my forte, at least not in 2015.
Right, but politics as it is currently configured is not delivering the big ideas, whether it's the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, because what you've got here is a load of sort of, let's think about things differently ideas, scrap the sort of the incremental arguments that British politics tends to be about, and let's try and sort of jump out of it and do something really different. And that is sort of quite damning of our political system, isn't it?
Is it damning about politics? Look, Brexit was a big idea, Krishnan. I didn't support it. But I mean, you can't say it wasn't a big idea. Jeremy Corbyn in 2017, for example, was proposing bolder things than I proposed in 2015. He did better than, he certainly got a higher share of the vote than I got, significantly higher share of the vote than I got. But I mean, if what you're saying to me is that the book is saying we need to think more profoundly about whether it's care or housing or parental leave or green, yes, I think we do. And I think it's hard. And look, I know this, when you're in the hurly-burly of day-to-day politics, and we haven't said this yet, this is not me saying I was right in the period of 2010 to 15. I didn't think big enough. I feel self-critically that my analysis was big. So I was big at talking about inequality, about predatory companies, about intervening in markets. But I don't think my solutions were big enough. You sort of implicitly said that in your question. I suppose, yeah. So I am encouraging politics to think bigger. That's definitely true.
So in terms of your analysis of what was wrong, I mean, how has that changed? I mean, if you start with business, you were sort of mocked and attacked at the time when you were leader for what they saw as sort of big attacks on business. Quite a lot of those ideas of sort of responsible business and regulation are more fashionable now than they were. But again, in the book, you're talking about sort of fundamental changes to the way business works, and the say that workers have in a business, and the responsibility of business to do good rather than just to deliver profit.
Well, I think it's really interesting, this debate, and I see this as a shadow business secretary, the way the debate has changed. When I talked about some of the behaviours of companies being predatory and so on, it was highly controversial. I don't think it's nearly as controversial now. I think when people see businesses practicing sort of the fire and rehire practices, you've got the Conservatives saying it's wrong. Many business people don't like it. So the mood has changed. Now, what am I saying in the book? I think I'm saying a couple of things. First of all, that the way that the company law structure in the UK, the way our financial system works, doesn't encourage but discourages businesses doing good. So if you think about our financial system, it still encourages short-term wealth extracting behavior, not long-term wealth creation, all kinds of ways that it's structured. If you think about the company law structure, it says that the shareholder must come first, not wider stakeholders. But you've got lots of businesses saying we want actually to treat all of our stakeholders equally, not just prioritize our shareholders. And you've got actually people on the right of politics, including in the US, saying the so-called shareholder primacy system is problematic. I do think workers should have more voice at work. I think if you look across the continent, to continental Europe, it produces a more successful system. And actually, you see, I make a joke in the book that Aardman Animation produced Wallace and Gromit, and I've been said to bear a passing resemblance to Wallace, as you all know. They've become an employee-owned company. I think there's really exciting ideas in that. So in a sense, this is where it sort of crosses over with maybe my role as shadow business secretary. I want to encourage a debate about some of these questions, because I think lots of businesses are up for, how do we have a different bargain? And just like business owes a different set of responsibilities to society, or as a set of responsibilities to society, I think government can work better with business when it comes to, say, what they call industrial policy, working with business for economic success.
I mean, in general, how compromised is our conversation today? I mean, across all these ideas, by the fact that you're back in the shadow cabinet. I mean, because, are you having to be careful that what you say doesn't become taken as Labour policy?
Well, it isn't Labour policy. And, to be fair to Keir Starmer, he knew I was writing the book when I got appointed, and he was happy for me to do it and happy for me to talk about ideas. The honest truth is I was cognizant of the fact that by the time I was about halfway through when I got appointed to the shadow cabinet, I was cognizant of the fact that I was a member of the shadow cabinet, and I needed to sort of be aware of that. But I wanted to push ideas.
Was there stuff you left out that you thought, I can't put that in there because it's too far out?
Like, for example, I don't trample all over tax policy in the book, as you'll see. I don't start saying, here's my views on tax policy, here's what we should be doing, because I thought, actually, that's a job for Rachel Reeves, now Shadow Chancellor. So in that sense, I don't do that. But it does, I hope, give a sense of what some big ideas are, and directions of travel. And by the way, this is, Saeeda Varsi, former Conservative Party chair, is on the cover of the book saying it made her think and rethink. I'm obviously a Labour politician, but I hope that the book offers at least signpost some ideas for both parties. I mean, take the issue of housing. I talk about social housing and the failure of both parties to build social homes. I genuinely believe we will not solve the housing crisis unless we take a completely different attitude to building social housing. Governments of both parties have tried everything since 1979, apart from building social homes at scale. If you take the care crisis, we can look to other countries that have done universal childcare and the difference that can make. So for quite a lot of the ideas in this book, maybe they'll be taken up by a Conservative government, maybe they won't. I obviously hope the Labour Party takes some of them up, but I've written it not in my front bench role.
The other area I was interested that you didn't sort of go into was the whole area of culture and the culture wars that are in many ways sort of plaguing the left at the moment. Do you think it is a problem for Labour that some of the cultural battling is putting people off?
I think the thing is, though, it's quite hard to talk about this in general terms. So let me give you an example, which maybe is not what you think of, maybe it is. If you take the 2017 election versus the 2019 general election, I'm not saying the only issue we had in 2019 was Brexit, but there is no question that in a seat like mine, Doncaster North, whereas Brexit was not dividing the Labour electorate in 2017, because people thought more or less we were going to accept the result of the referendum, in 2019, it was incredibly difficult. We had lots and lots of people who felt, I voted Leave, and now Labour wants to reverse it. So, but I mean, but that is a sort of very specific sort of example. If what you're saying to me is, should Labour go soft in arguing for racial justice or trans rights or those issues, well, my answer to that is no. I do think Biden is a lesson in this, Joe Biden. He has been strong on those issues, but he's also was able, narrowly, to put together a coalition to win an election and is now implementing big sort of economic change. So I don't think we need to sort of think, well, we can't talk about those issues because people will be put off. That isn't what people in Doncaster say to me, but people are saying, and I suppose this is the biggest thing I learned from my time as leader. I didn't talk enough in primary colours. When I say this thing about I wasn't bold enough, it sounds like, okay, well, what does that actually mean? Mario Cuomo said you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose, and maybe I campaigned in prose rather than poetry. How are you going to make a difference to my life? Are you going to build homes for me to live in? Are you going to have a proper what's called a Green New Deal to give decently paid jobs for the future? Are you going to help me kind of with my parental leave, with my childcare? Are you going to sort out the social care crisis? So I sort of think I sort of think it's big picture. I'm not trying to move away from your question, but that I hopefully have given you an answer.
And that also takes me to what I was going to talk about next, which is another sort of analysis of the difference between Labour and the Conservatives at the moment, which is that you could say that where Labour is coming from at the moment, and where a lot of the ideas in your book are coming from, which are about economic injustice, are about a grievance and about solving grievances and injustices, and that does involve taking something away from people, from those with power and wealth. Whereas the Conservative approach, whatever it may be in reality, sells itself very much as about empowering, about levelling up, about not taking anything away from anybody, but only giving. And that's quite a difficult, contrast, isn't it, to fight? If one is basically about grievance and the other is about positivity.
But I don't accept. I mean, I hope people who read my book don't think it's about grievance. I think it is about addressing our injustices, but I think it's deeply optimistic. Look, I feel deeply optimistic about the kind of world and the kind of country we can create. I think we've got big issues that we've got to face, like climate, like inequality.
But it's your starting point, is what I mean. Your starting point is that the world is an unfair place, and we've got to solve that. And here are some great ideas.
Isn't this interesting?
Boris Johnson's starting point isn't that?
Well, but that's so interesting, Krishnan, because that is his starting point. What is the whole levelling up agenda about? It's about this is what's so interesting about where politics is compared to when I was leader. You see, Cameron and Osborne said in the 2016 referendum, essentially, vote for us because things are going so well. Vote Remain because not vote for us, but vote Remain because things are going well. Johnson's argument is different. Johnson's argument, and it's partly because his social base has changed the red wall and so on, is he's saying there are great injustices. We need to do something about them. And this is what I think is so interesting about the contours of British politics in the years ahead, which is that I think the contours are going to be who can build this new settlement. And I think that's where the Conservatives are very vulnerable. Because if you still believe that free market solutions are essentially the solution, if you think you can have a world of sort of 0 hours contracts, great imbalances of power at work, government still playing a pretty limited role, not during the pandemic, but when you go back to so-called normal, I don't think they're going to solve those problems. I mean, I'm interested that you think that's their starting point, and maybe there's a sort of paradox in where their starting point is.
Well, I don't remember Boris Johnson talking about great injustices. I remember Theresa May talking about great injustices, but I don't remember Boris Johnson really doing that. And I don't think that's the impression people get of him. That they think he's more about. He would say what you're saying is you're doing Britain down. You're saying we're bad. You should be celebrating what we're about and actually extending what's great to everybody rather than doing people down.
I'm all for that. Look, the thing I say about the pandemic, I really want to sort of make this point about optimism, because the thing I say about the pandemic is it's revealed absolutely brilliant things about us. The way, our stoicism, our sort of the community groups that have come together during this crisis, our key workers, all of those things, I think it's revealed brilliant things. As I say, it's like the tide went out and it's revealed the best of us. But then the contrast between the best of us and the way our country is run. What are our key workers paid? How are our public services invested in? Who has power at work and who doesn't? So I'm completely with you, if I can put it that way, that, we need to be the optimist. And I am completely the optimist. I'm the optimist that our country can be so much better. I think it's actually the pessimists who say, well, this is kind of as good as it gets, or maybe a little bit better, but we just can't take on these big challenges. Other countries may have done it, but we can't. I believe we can.
And do you think in order for Labour to succeed now that it needs to be a bit more like this than where it's at? Because it's obviously in trouble at the moment, isn't it?
Well, we definitely need to go big. Look, I think that's definitely true. And I know that Keir believes that too. I don't believe that small scale politics is either the right thing for the country or the right thing for Labour, partly because of the challenges we face, the climate challenge, the inequality challenge, recovery from COVID. And I think where people are and the change people want, partly because of the nature of our opponents, because I think that our opponents are not going to be going into the next election saying, we're about small change. They're going to be trying to offer a big change offer. Now, I think we can say and expose that it's hollow, but I think that the future for Labour, the best future for Labour, the best future for the country is to go big. I mean, that's kind of, that's in a way the argument of the book. So if I didn't think that, why would I have written a book? And it is partly also the lesson I learned from my own time as leader, which is I think people need to know the big strokes of what you're about. I think they need to, and I don't think they had enough of a sense from me of the big strokes of what I'm about. But this book was not written as advice for Keir or advice for the Labour Party. It's just my view. I also happen to think it's the right thing for Labour.
Well, I mean, I think that's the point, isn't it? I mean, Tony Blair would always say, when you stop becoming Prime Minister, you're actually better qualified than you ever were before to be Prime Minister, and it's sort of annoying that you're not. I mean, I would imagine you now think 10 years on that and I know you're not pitching for the job, but no, I would imagine you think, not. If I was leader now, I'd be much better at it. What's the Sherman Oath? If I'm nominated, I will not serve. Exactly. No. Go on. But do you find yourself thinking, well, I now know what I would have done better?
Experience and hindsight are both sort of excellent things. I mean, I look around at David Cameron, Nick Clegg, George Osborne. They've all left politics, and I totally respect that decision. But I think it's incredibly hard to stay on after you've been in high office. Now, in different ways, they had a higher office than me. I think the benefit of staying around is that maybe you can use your experience and to try to carry on learning. I think it's really hard in politics. Maybe humility is, people should probably say I should have lots of doses of humility, but it's hard to have humility and it's hard to carry on learning. I've tried to carry on learning from my defeat, learning from the two elections that have happened since 2017 and 2019, learning from the Brexit referendum. That, in a sense, partly the Brexit referendum was the biggest sign to me that I underestimated the scale of change that people wanted to see. So, yeah, I mean, look, experience, as I say, in hindsight, are great things.
Also, with hindsight, and given what happened, do you think it was definitely right to stand for the leadership?
Yeah, I do.
With hindsight.
Yeah, I do.
You think it was worth it, and because it obviously had big personal impact on you as well, and your relationship with David and all of that.
I felt I had something distinctive to say, and I had something distinctive to say about the country, and I had something distinctive to say about the Labour Party, and the two things were linked. And about New Labour did great things for the country, and I'll never sort of underestimate that. Building schools, the hospitals, tax credits, minimum wage, things I was involved in, peace in Northern Ireland. But I felt I had something distinctive to say about what we hadn't done and where the country needed to go, and issues like inequality that we faced. And that was why I ran. And I don't regret running. I regret losing the election. Obviously, I do. But I don't regret the decision to stand. I think it's partly that you can't go through life having lots of regrets and looking backwards, but also I don't regret it.
But do you also not wonder whether you were wrong, in retrospect as well? That when you look back at the record of the election-winning machines in the Labour Party and what's happened since, that maybe the sort of the distance that you put between yourself and New Labour wasn't the right analysis, because ultimately they won elections and you and Corbyn and now Keir Starmer are losing them.
I think New Labour and all political parties are a product of their time. And the time was, look, we're in the middle of a long boom, a long economic boom in the 1990s. We didn't face the climate crisis in the way that we have. New Labour, as I say, did great things. But I also think, and I say this in the book, and this is no disrespect to New Labour because I was part of it, we didn't do enough, in my view, to alter the economic settlement. And I think we were losing votes throughout the 2000s, 5 million votes or something in the 2000s. I think Tony Blair once said, you learn from history, but you don't live in it. And I think even those who are associated with New Labour, lots of the people I respect, say, look, the solutions that were right for the 1990s aren't right for now. Tony Blair was elected leader of the Labour Party 27 years ago. If we'd said in the 1990s, we should learn from what happened in the 1960s, people would have said, well, hang on a minute, that was 27 years ago. Now, obviously, you learn from it. You do learn from it. You learn from every Labour success and failure. But I don't think you can sort of emulate the same recipe. The world is so different. And look at Biden. I mean, I just say to the people who say, well, the new Labour formula is the right formula. Look at how Biden is going big. And actually, lots of the people who were associated with Biden were part of Obama. And they say, look, we've evolved our thinking, both politically and in terms of the country.
Well, I think that's the question, isn't it? That rather than distancing yourself the way you all did from New Labour, couldn't you have evolved it the way Joe Biden has? I mean, it is odd, isn't it, that the economic settlement and injustice as you see it has been left to the Conservatives to sort out with the levelling up agenda, rather than a more radical left-wing Labour government. You know, that's what people chose.
I take full responsibility that I lost, and people chose David Cameron and not me for a whole range of reasons. You know, look, the funny thing is that I was an evolution. I was an evolution from New Labour. I mean, the notion that I mean, in a funny way, this goes to the sort of the kind of analysis of me at the time and the analysis of me in retrospect. You know, the notion that I was people said I was a redhead living in a Marxist universe and all that. But really, I wasn't. I mean, I was relatively moderate. I mean, okay, so I proposed an energy price freeze, and I said inequality was a problem, and the behaviour of some businesses was problematic. Now, it might have seemed revolutionary at the time, and I took on Murdoch, but I mean, it really wasn't that revolutionary. And actually, in it now, people would not say it was revolutionary. Now, I'm not as skillful a politician as Tony Blair.
But Corbyn took the party much further, didn't he?
Corbyn, yeah, of course he did. And some elements of that boldness, I think, were right, and some of them were wrong. And so, you've got to sort that out. But look at the challenges that social democratic parties are facing around the world: France, Germany, elsewhere. All of them are facing these challenges of globalization, the breakdown of class structure. People on the left need to understand that the right is championing many of the causes that the left used to champion, whether it's stagnant wages or inequality, all of those things. Now, I don't believe that the Trump solutions, the sort of solutions that Boris Johnson are offering, are the solutions. But think of where the match is being played on that pitch. You can easily the sliding doors version of history is sort of easy, and I totally respect it, and people are entitled to their view. I did what I felt was right at the time. I'm honest about what I didn't do right at the time and what I could have done better, and so on. I'm not sure that the New Labour formula would have worked such as it was if I just said I was, after we got rejected, we lost the election in 2010.
Can I take you back to sort of a bit of your roots, actually, which is about, to do with your mother, I suppose, and your Jewish identity. You were unusual in that you were sort of, you were culturally Jewish, although you always said you were atheist, but you were able to be very critical of Israel as Labour leader in a way that, once the Corbyn, project had sort of taken hold of the Labour Party, it became an absolute sort of disaster zone for Labour, talking about this whole area. What do you think is the right place for the Labour Party on the Middle East, particularly in the light of the recent war?
The thing I'd say is, we've got to be the people who defend the two-state solution, who condemn the violence on both sides, which I did, condemn illegal settlements, rightly, condemn Hamas bombing. You sort of say it was, you didn't say it was easy for me, you said I could be critical.
No, it wasn't easy.
No, I mean, it wasn't easy. And lots of people in the Jewish community were worried by some of the things that I said. I mean, it's a sort of tragic situation. The truth is, what I see is the lack of any peace process. Now, we have a new government potentially coming in Israel. Maybe that will make a difference. But the lack of any peace process, the lack of any sort of sense of progress is part of the deep problems that we have.
Do you think the recent controversies over anti-Semitism, though, have made this almost an impossible area for Labour to go to at the moment?
I don't think it's an impossible area. I think I'd sort of see the recent controversies over anti-Semitism on their own, in their own. I mean, it was a terrible sort of period. And, I think Keir is completely right about this, that, he's right to take strong action and he's right to be really tough on it. because it's got to be dealt with, and it can't be allowed to be in our party. One anti-Semite is too many.
And you mentioned, I mean, there was a reaction to your own words as Labour leader. Do you think those people were wrong? The sort of the Maureen Lipman criticisms and things like that.
Well, I think in the
that you stand by everything you said at the time.
What I'd say is, I considered myself a friend of Israel, but I could also be a critic. My grandma had refuge in Israel after she left Poland after the war. I had a great fondness for it. I visited in 2014. I visited before. I visited her in Tel Aviv in the 1970s. To those people who thought that I was somehow an opponent of Israel or an opponent of the state of Israel, absolutely not. I was an opponent of what the Israeli government had been doing, some of what it was doing.
How important was that to your childhood? Was it a part of your childhood at all? Your identity, your Jewish identity?
I mean, it was sort of in the background. I mean, for those who don't know, my mum was in hiding. Her father was killed during the Second World War by the Nazis. She was in Poland, and she was in hiding for most of the war, and came to England as a teenager. And my dad fled Belgium at the age of 16 with his father from the Nazis. They didn't really like to talk, particularly my mum didn't really like to talk about it. My dad could talk about it because obviously he and his father and his sister and his mother survived. So it's easier, I think, for him to talk about it. But the reason I think it was sort of in the background was it kind of informed who they were. I mean, it's funny you should say this thing about atheism, because I think I know I have an atheist, but it was almost their sense that you had a duty to make the world a better place was almost religious. I'd almost describe it as religious. Religious people would identify with it. I think a lot of religious people would identify with it, that, while you were on the earth, I think they've put it this way, you had a duty to make the world better. I think it must have been their experience, because every day was precious.
In terms of family, obviously, your relationship with David when you were both in the shadow cabinet became sort of a bit of a soap opera, and the whole question over the leadership and all the rest of it. Now that the sort of the Conservative soap opera is way in advance of anything that was going on in Labour, do you think it would be possible for him to come back if he wanted to?
Sure, definitely, and that's his decision. He
would you like to see it?
Yeah, of course, but I think that's very much for him. I mean, he's running a very successful refugee charity in the US. He's doing amazing things. I talk to him regularly about what he's doing. He is making a difference. He is changing the world. That's totally his decision.
No, of course. I just wonder whether. Obviously, it's a weird thing when you have relatives in frontline posts, but it's not unique. It has happened elsewhere in British politics, and I just wonder whether you think it would be fine again now if it were to happen.
Of course, definitely, and that's very. But that's
or would it be uncomfortable?
No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. Look, this was a thing that happened 10 years ago. It was very difficult. It was painful, but we love each other very much. We talk a lot. He's on the other side of the world, obviously, but these life decisions have of course they have a long-term impact, but you move past them, and that's what we've done.
Yeah. I mean, you know why I'm asking, don't you? It's because the people are talking once again about the possibility of Keir Starmer having to step down. Do you think there's any possibility of that?
No. Look, he was elected.
If you lose Batley and Stone?
No. He was elected. Look, he was. Whenever anyone is leader of the Labour Party, I feel profound sort of sympathy, because it's a nightmare job. I found it a nightmare job. Keir was elected after our worst election defeat since 1935. He knew it was a mountain to climb, as he put it. He's in it for the long haul, rightly. He's got a vision for how this country can be transformed, I believe, which is around the big change we need in our economy, in particular, the big change we need in education, the investment we need. He's got a long track record. I think the more the people see of him, they'll see somebody of great decency, great integrity, somebody who's a deeply serious person. I think he's a good contrast to Boris Johnson. So, yeah, that's certainly my view.
I mean, it's interesting that you say he's got a vision. I mean, because I mean, that's what people say. They don't know what his vision is. Do you think he's told us what his vision is, or is it that you know what we don't?
He gave a speech a couple of months ago where he started to set it out. He's going to do more of it. The circumstances of the last year have been unimaginably awful for the British people, and that's the main thing to bear in mind. He also, though, came into those circumstances as Labour leader, incredibly unusual and difficult set of circumstances. I think he's done what the country wanted, which is at a time of national crisis to hold the government to account. I think he's inevitably been constrained in how much he can talk about the future by the fact that we've been in the middle of the pandemic. Let's hope we continue to open up, although we've got to be led by the science. But as we come through the pandemic, which we will, he will get more of a chance to set out what he wants to do for the country. And by the way, you might expect me to say this, but I do think leadership is a collective responsibility. We've all got a responsibility, not just Keir.
And do you think that the country is now split two ways? That there's sort of left, right, if for want of a better way, on the economy and social justice and all of those things, but there's also the split around Brexit. And do you think that will continue? Because it seemed to be a factor in Hartlepool. You wonder if it will be a factor again in Batley and Spen. How do you stop that bipolarisation?
Well, but for Labour, by moving on Brexit, by saying and making clear, as we have done, that we've moved past the Brexit Remain Leave argument, which we have. And I think that's incredibly important. And I think what Keir has done, which people maybe haven't given him credit for reasons I understand, is to say that. And I think it's incredibly important that we move past that argument. We're outside the European Union. We're building a different future. We may regret that decision was made, but it was made, and we are moving forward and looking forwards. And I think that's where we've got to be. And there are huge things to fight for. I mean, one of the reasons I'm still in politics, and one of the reasons I wrote this book, is I think there are huge things to fight for. Huge things to fight for about the future of this country. I feel like, when I came into politics in the 1990s as an advisor in New Labour, it's like the parameters were, I wouldn't say they were clear, but, there were certain parameters. I feel like we're at a time when the future, I said this in the book, the future could be quite scary and difficult. You've got the rise of a real right populism, but, we could write a different future. And that's sort of why I'm in it. And I think that's where we've got to be.
And do you think you've got the people? Because the last section of your book is actually about organising. It's about political organising and what you learned yourself, I suppose, in that respect from your own experience. Do you think Labour has the people on the ground now that it's going to need to win an election? Or is it is there a danger of sort of you lose the Corbynist contingent and then who replaces them?
But I think we do have hundreds of thousands of members. And I think we can keep lots of the people who joined after I lost, who are idealists and who want the country to be better, and who want a big vision of the future. And I want them to be part of that fight for the future under Keir. And I think they can be part of that fight for the future under Keir. I think there is a really important point about this, and I tried this, Jeremy tried it, and it's how do you make Labour not just a machine that knocks on doors at elections, but is genuinely learns lessons from the community organising movement. These are the people who fought for and won the living wage, fighting for fair rents and so on. That's what lots of Labour parties are doing around the country. We need to do more of that. We definitely need to do more of that because we live in a country where I'm not talking about Channel 4 News, but lots of the media is on one side of the print media is on one side of the political spectrum. Labour has people on the ground. And I think it's been something that I didn't get right. Jeremy tried, but trying to make Labour a sort of fighting force on the ground is something that is a big sort of work in progress, right? And it's something that I know the Labour Party the General Secretary takes very, very seriously.
Well, look, we have an end question on the podcast, which is if you could change the world in any way, how would you change it? If you could wave a magic wand. Now, this is tricky because you've got lots and lots of different ideas in the book. But I wonder, would you choose one of these or would you choose something different?
That's a really interesting question. It's like 20 different, I've got 20 different ideas and 20 different chapters. I tell you what I would sort of choose, because I think I'm going for something which is both idealistic and doable, I think. And maybe it's a sort of surprising choice, which is this idea of paid paternity leave and so-called use it or lose it paternity leave, which they do in Scandinavia. And people might think, well, why is that going to change the world? I tell you why I think this is an inspiring idea. It's basically 3 or 6 months for fathers as well as maternity leave for mothers, paid at a decent rate. And I'll tell you why I think that's such an exciting and interesting idea, because I think it opens up big vistas, not just about gender equality and the role of men and women in our society, but about work and family. It leads you into a whole discussion of care and childcare and social care and how we put care in our economy. It's about the role of business and about the role of flexibility at work. So as practical ideas go, which could be implemented in the sort of next 5 years, I would sort of go big on that. And if I can have a bonus one, if I'm allowed to sort of slightly cheat, the sort of long-term idea on its own, I think, could be transformative, is this idea of the universal basic income. This is the idea that you replace to some parts of our social security system with a flat rate income paid to all. We talked earlier in the interview about freedom and empowerment. And I think if you were really reinventing our systems from scratch, it could make an enormous difference in that respect, because it gives people a security that sort of middle-class rich people can take for granted, and so many people in our society can't. But that, as I say in the book, I can't see it happening anytime soon because of cost and all kinds of other factors. So that's more in the sort of 10, 20, 30-year view, whereas the parental leave is more in the 5-year view.
Ed Miliband, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for sharing your ways to change the world and your ideas on how to fix our world. Good luck with the book. Our producer is Rachel Evans. You can watch all of these interviews on the Channel 4 News YouTube channel. Until next time, bye-bye.